Okay, let's get started. As I said, tons to go through. Just to make sure that you're all here for the right thing, this is unboxing what's new in Postman v10. So there's a new version of Postman that's been released probably a week back, I want to say 2 weeks back. It's a slow rollout, so we're rolling out to people who have signed up to the early release, and then to different teams that also have signed up. But don't worry, I'll let you know at the end of the webinar how to sign up for that. But also, if you just Google sign up early release Postman v10, you'll find the link. So I'm not hiding anything there. My name is Arlemy. I'm the lead for developer advocacy at Postman. We do tons of things, but most of it is spreading the word about Postman features, what's new, and how you can best leverage these features. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So I'm going to keep on going for today's agenda. I'll kind of give an overview of what Postman was and is today and how it improved. We'll jump into the new features specifically, and I'm going to pretend I'm an API producer and then an API consumer and kind of walk you through different flows. Show you how to get access to v10, which I think is still pretty valuable. And I'll share some resources and we do a Q&A at the end. But let's jump into it. I have some questions for you. And turns out one of the things I forgot to do because I was too busy prepping for that for the webinar is to get the polls ready. So I'm going to ask you to use the chat for these ones. And the first question is how long you've been using Postman. So just let me know in the chat. It could be a year, it could be 5 years, 3 years. It's just for me to get like a kind of an overview. So I see 2 years, 2 years, 4 years, 2 years, 3 years, nearly 10 years. Some people have started using Postman before it was even created. That's impressive. 5 to 6 years, yeah, that's possible. Okay, so I see not at all. Their team uses it. That's cool. Seems to be an average of like around 2-3 years, and then we have obviously always like two extremes, which are people that have been like starting to use it pretty new, like Tammy that I just see, and some that have been using it for a long time, like 8 years, 6 years, 10 years even. So that's great to hear. I'm actually gonna walk through kind of the story of Postman. I see Pierre is already answering my next question, so hold that thought. But Postman started about 10 years ago as an API client. It was a Chrome extension. It grew into a more simpler app, but that only had collections and history. And then it turned into an API collaboration platform. So that's from v6, v7. And then you could add APIs, you could have collections, you could have a team library, etc. And as of v9, we've added, and we've made it an all API platform. And that's where we are today. So from last year, we had v9 and we started making available all of these things of working with your team, but also this API producer side. And that leads me to my next question, which is, what version of Postman are you using? Some of you, even if you've been using it for 10 years, you must still be running Postman, the Chrome extension. But I'm assuming most of you would be on v9. That's what I'm seeing here. So a lot of you are on like v9.31, which is the latest one. We have, one of you is still on the Chrome extension. Keep it, because that's a relic now. Not a lot of people are using that, and you can't even install it anymore. And I see a couple that are on v10, so that you're the lucky ones who've already got access to v10. And for the other ones, again, I'm going to show you how to get access. Don't worry. Cool. The macOS version, yep. It's probably v9, I'm assuming. Cool. So now let's talk about one last thing before we jump into the features. I've been mentioning that a couple of times already. It's whether you're an API producer or an API consumer. And that's kind of the two parts of what we define as the API lifecycle. So if you're an API producer, which means you're creating APIs for others to consume, think about companies like maybe Twilio, Stripe, all these API first company. So you're defining your API, you're developing it, testing it. And when it's ready to go, you can distribute it. And that's the left-hand side. And that's a flow that Postman also supports. And one of the flow that most of you will probably be familiar with is the consumer lifecycle. And on that side, that's any user out there who's like looking to build something, probably they'll evaluate what different APIs are out there. Let's say I want to do some communication. I'll go and look at Twilio, Vonage, Ericsson. All of these companies are doing communication APIs. I'll integrate, test, and then I'll observe how that works. And now for my last question, you probably can guess what it's going to be. Do you consider yourself an API producer, an API consumer, or both? I see a lot of both. I see only both. That's good. It's great to see. So a lot of you are creating APIs. A lot of you are consuming them. And then we have a bunch of consumers, testing mostly. Cool. So mostly both, which is good because there's v10 features for both sides of the API lifecycle. I see quite a few testing, and that's great because that you see towards the end, I'm going to talk about the Postman CLI, which is a new tool for testers using Postman. And then I see a few integration consumers. Cool. All right. So that sets the stage for the webinar. I kind of see who I'm talking to. You're all on one of the latest version of Postman, which is good. And we have both producer and consumers. So that's good. I'll just remind you one thing. We've used the chat profusely for these polls, but now going forward, if you have any questions, do use the Q&A, because now we have Pooja, Ian, and Kevin in the background, who's going to be looking at your questions and answering as we go along. So let's get started. I'm going to jump to Postman and make my screen bigger. If there's any issue with zooming in, zooming out, do let me know. I can zoom in once more if needed. But otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead. Okay, so that's Postman. It should be familiar with most of you. That's your homepage. Nothing much new in here. A couple of things that we noticed though, from v10 you'll have, and these features are only for enterprise, the one that I'm going to mention now, API governance and API security. So these are these two new tabs that are there. They're new, but I'm going to go further in details with that later. It's just so you know that it's there, and that's the main difference. So let's go ahead and create a new workspace for this demo, and I'll call it v10 unboxing. We are going to use this workspace for a live demo. And this is a live demo. Something may go wrong. Hopefully nothing does, but if it does, we'll try to recover from it. Another thing you may notice here is this partner type of workspace. So we've had different type of workspaces for a while. Personal, this is only for you. Private, and that's for you and team, but you select who can access to that. Team, anyone in your team can get access to it, and that's what I'm going to use now. And public, so that's if you've done any Postman training, if you've forked any public collections, that's what these public workspaces are. The partner workspace is one that you can share with a different team. So let's say you work, I don't know, let's take the example that we mentioned before, Twilio, and you actually are building an API in partnership with Stripe. You could create a partner workspace that only these two companies will be able to access. So that's opening it to others, but while still controlling who can see what's in there. We'll go back to it a bit later as well. So I create a new workspace, and that UI, nothing new here. You've got a little title, the description that I've put, and what's in this workspace. So there's nothing here. But one thing that we see is that I can now add my workspace to the API network. So until now, the private API network only allowed for collections to be there. But now I can add a workspace, I can add a collection, and this would actually appear in the API network up there. We'll go and have a look later. One of the things that I do want to mention, so there's this description, and that's not new. You can do a few things here, but one of the things we can do now, let me bring this here if I can. Oop, apparently I can't, it's fine. So I'm just going to drag and drop an image in there. That image. And now what we do, we automatically upload your image. So you don't have to think about hosting the image, then adding the link, etc. With the new, we call it what you see is what you get editor. you can add images and you can upload them straight away by just dragging and dropping anything from your desktop. Not sure why this is not coming here, but that's fine. So yeah, added an image, magically added to that workspace. And then save it. And you can do that in any part where there's documentation in Postman. So that could be your collections, that could be your request, your workspace, etc. Not going to demo it at every level because I think this one is sufficient. So let's keep on going. Another thing that's new, and currently I'm in the seat of an API producer, right? I have an API and I want to start editing it, maybe see if there's any errors, etc. And I have one in my PC, so I'm going to go ahead and import. And that's also a new feature from Postman v10. Until now, whenever you were working with API definitions in Postman, all you could do was importing a single file OpenAPI definition or API definition. Now, if you have a folder, you can also upload that. And yes, I'm going to upload it all. And Postman is now going to recognize that you have a root file, and that's your main file that defines your path, your security schemes, etc. But it's able to refer to other parts of the API. So I'll go ahead and import that. Successful, very nice. So this creates an API for me in the API tab here. And I can see that I have a definition made of several folders and file, and I have my root file right here, which still allows me to see all of the rest of the API. So I can see there's different paths, even if they're not shown in that file. If I click on one, this is going to navigate automatically to the correct file in here. This makes it a lot easier when you're working with huge API definition files. Instead of having it all in a 1,000, 2,000, even 10,000 lines long API definition, you can now organize it by resources, response schemas, parameters, etc. So pretty cool one. It's a small update, but one of the ones that can have a big impact. Now let's go back to our API overview. And if you've worked with API before, this UI is pretty new. We used to have tons of tabs in here, one for define, one for development, testing, deployment, etc. We've tried to kind of make it easier and centralize it all in the same place. So now only from that page, you can see the test and automation, API performance and deployments if you had any. Same again, you can publish the API to the network. But one of the big one that's right here is this connect button. What this does is if you're working with any of these tools, version control tools like Azure DevOps, GitLab, Bitbucket, or GitHub, you can now have a native Git control, version control with Postman. So I'll go ahead and connect to GitHub. So yes, I'm with Postman, I'm authorized. So now it's going to pull all of my GitHub data, and I should have a repository that I can use. Let me do v10. So I'll select my repository. I can select which branch I want to work on. I could create one from here, but I'm not going to show that directly. You can either select a folder if you already have one. Let's say you're actually linking with an existing repository where other people from your team have already worked, and you want to link to one of their folder, you can do that. Or you can just let Postman create a directory for collections and schemas. So I'm going to leave it to default and connect. And now you can see I have a connected repository, and I could click here to access the repository in GitHub, and that's my repository. I can access the branch directly. And one of the things that I see now at the bottom, and that's where it gets a lot more interesting than what we had before, is you can see where your branch is, or like what your content is compared to your remote repository. So now I can see I'm on main, there's some changes. So that's all of the files that I've imported previously. They're not available on GitHub yet. So I'm going to push them there so that my team can now access it. I'll say added API definition, and I'll push that directly. So now it's available. I can go back to my GitHub repository, and I can see it's created a Postman folder with the API definition and the collections. Immediately, I push directly to the main branch. This is not what this is not best practices, but for the sake of this demo, that's what we're going to do. Now, another thing you can do, and I mentioned branching before. Let's say I want to work on a branch. I'm going to go ahead in my definition. Actually, oh, there we go. Now I have a doubt. Well, I'm not going to show that now because I forgot how to do it. That's fine. I'm going to jump onto the next one, which is how I can directly validate and see if there's any either security rules or violation or governance rules violation, etc. So let me wait for this to validate. In the meantime, let me see if there's any questions that I can answer already. When using a repository, is everything still synced with Postman's backend? If you're logged into your account, yes, it will be synced to our servers. Not everything, only the things that you want Postman to sync. So let's say you're using variables, anything in your current value will not be synced to our servers. And then I see another question quickly, which is there an integration for Bitbucket? Yes, we do have an integration for Bitbucket. This seems to not want to validate my collection, so let me re-import it and see if that would help. See, at the start, it's a live demo. You never know what could go wrong. Okay, so this one was pulled from the start, and we can see here at the bottom. So that's the same API, but this one validates, so we'll work with that one. So there's different things here. If you've done API definition validation in the past, this syntax tab is not new. We've always validated on the fly your definition. So if I add, or maybe if I remove, let's say I remove the servers here, and I save. And I remove, let's say, the version. So now it says it's not recognizing that it's a valid schema, so it's going to complain. I'm just going to put it back as it was. So that's not new. It was there already. But what is new is this rule tab. I do want to mention this is an enterprise feature. I'm still going to demo it because I think it's valuable, and you might be using Postman Enterprise. So a few things here. There's two types of things that we validate now: the security type and the governance type. And then there's different levels of importance, I would say. For example, this one is a security type, and it says your security field is not defined. And we help you fixing this. So if you click on the possible fix next to it, this redirects to our learning center where you can actually see, oh, so you should actually have a security thing with maybe a test authentication array or something like that. If you're a bit crazy, you could just hide it and never go back to it. And then you just say, not my problem if there's a security issue. Obviously, don't do that, but you can do that for all of these. And then there's the governance one. So the governance one are rules that either we provide to you or that you can add as well. And you can see, for example, this schema property should have $ref property referencing. And then you can click and see where this is happening. And you can see that here there's no $ref, so it's complaining about that. All of these rules are customizable. You can edit them and you can find them. So if we go back to the home, and that's the one that I had mentioned a bit earlier. So you can find the API governance and API security here. And if you click on this, then in your settings, you can see I have different custom rules, and I can toggle them on or off. If I was an admin, there's the API information, API operations, etc. When you're working with a big team and on tons of API definition, this makes a lot of sense. You can also see the severity level, the type of APIs that it's valid on. And again, from here, you can also delete them if you don't need them. Let me go back to my workspace. I have notes of what I'm supposed to show on the side. I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Okay, so we were here in the rules. We can see there's different ones, etc. That's new. Now let's go back to the home page. So I mentioned how we also have these 3 ones that are there. There used to be tabs before, now they're all on the same page. But from here, if I wanted to test and create some automation, I know there's quite a few testers watching. You may be interested in that. From here, I can set up different pipelines, for example. So if you're using any of these, Circle CI, Travis CI, Jenkins, etc., in your CI/CD, then you can connect them directly to Postman, see the run results in Postman. And it also helps you run your test against the latest version of the collection of the tests. You can see collections here, and if I wanted, I could run the collection directly from there. And now from here, you can see 2 different things. The run manually, and that's not new. It's a typical run. I can just click run. It's going to fail because this is all 404 not found because my base URL is not defined. That's fine. But if I go back, let me do new run instead. I can see this option, which is the automate runs via CLI, and that's new. So I mentioned in the intro the Postman CLI. If some of you are familiar with Newman, which is command line runner for Postman collection, an open source project that we have, the Postman CLI is kind of an advanced Newman. So quick teaser, we'll get back to this later, but just so you know, it's there's a Postman CLI. So going back to our API builder, and I'm still in this API producer view, I can jump back to my homepage. I can see the API performance one. So anyone in your team that's looking at performance may be interested in integrating with their tools here. So you can add Datadog or New Relic. I'm not jumping into the specific integrations because they're not new. What's new is where you find them. And then the last one is deployment. If you remember this API lifecycle that we see, one of the last part of the API producer is the deployment. You're happy with your API, you've tested it, you've documented it, now you can deploy it. So we have the AWS API gateway that's been there for a while, but a new one is RPGX. So if using any of these 2, you could jump in there and start setting up the deployment. We have some documentation and videos on that if you're interested. Okay. So that was an open API definition, and it had multiple files, etc. One of the things that you may be aware of, and if you're not, I'm just going to remind you of it, is that Postman does not only support REST APIs, it also supports other type of APIs, such as, if we go in here, we can see there's WebSocket and gRPC. And until now, for gRPC at least, what we could do was querying a gRPC server. But one of the things that's been added from v10 is the fact that you can also import proto files. So proto files are files that describe your gRPC server. So I'll go ahead and do that. I click import, choose a file, and I'm going to get the file that Ian provided me right before, right there. So it recognizes it as an API of type protobuf2. Can go ahead and import it. And now I can see I have this hello service API with a definition. And the same way I can edit other API definition types, I can now edit proto files directly here. There's syntax highlighting, the search if it was a big file, etc. So that's one part of it. And now I'm actually going to jump on the other side of things, which is the API consumer, because that's cool. I can do I can do protofile definition in there. But what's the benefit for me as a user, right? What does this give me when I want to try out an API? Let me jump back to collections. And from here, I'll create a new request, a gRPC request, and see that in the server URL here, what I can do is select one of the API that I've previously created, so the Hello Service one, and this is automatically going to create a mock server that I'm going to be able to use. So now I've selected it. I can say I want to use that mock server, and now I have a live mock server. It's a mock server, right? It's not connected to any service out there, but just based on the definition I've imported, I can now start playing around. So if I want to say, send a simple request, say hello, I can go in the message and say, I'll send hello webinar people. Send it, and it's going to reply some random stuff. Now, because these gRPC APIs are asynchronous, I can send one and get lots of replies. So I'll send just one, and you can see there's tons of stuff that comes back. So the new thing here is the fact that I can automatically generate mock servers. The other thing that's new is now I'm actually able to test my gRPC APIs directly in Postman as well. So for the testers out there, if you're familiar with the tests in Postman, is where you actually write a bit of JavaScript to test that something matches. So for example, this one, I'm testing that the response time is always below 200 milliseconds. Now, if I invoke that, I can see the test results. It did not pass because it took actually 471 milliseconds instead of 200. So that's, so I think as I talk, the team is sharing some links in the chat. If not, we'll share them by email anyway. But this one, we have a blog about gRPC specifically. We have a blog about the API builder. So we have different links that are being shared. So now, while we're in the API API consumer side of things, how do I consume things? If I want to search for an API that I want to play around with. So we mentioned the API network. So there's three of them. One of them is the private API network, public API network, and partner API network. So let's talk about the private API network first, because there's a bunch of new stuff in here. As I mentioned at the start, before in the private API network, all you could do was add APIs. So the only thing you would be able to see here was APIs, and then you could create folders to organize them. So you can see we're all making good use of adding images to the documentation. But now you can actually add different types of things. So we do have APIs, but you can also add an entire workspace. So if I click on that workspace, I can now see, this workspace is in the private API network. So it's been created for my team, by my team. And I can see what's part of that workspace. And you can also add collections directly, like an empty collection or not so empty collection, and you'll be able to see the documentation from here. And this is a view only, right? I'm looking at these collections, I'm looking at these elements. And once I found one that is interesting to me, I can actually click here at the top right on View in Workspace. And now I can start playing with this collection, or I can start, maybe let's say I wanted to use that one. I'll bring it in my workspace using the version control. And this is just going to create a copy of this in my workspace. I can now start playing with it. So that's the private API network. So it's got a redesign. You now have the documentation directly in there, and you can have different types of elements, which are the three main things from this update. We have the public API network. Nothing new here. If you're not familiar with the API network, it's a place where any companies can share their collections, and then you can fork them to your workspace, start playing with them. The one that is new is the partner API network. So we actually don't have any partners on that team. So there's nothing I can show you. It's just going to say it's coming. But the benefit of the partner API network, again, is that, let's say I want to work with another team on a collection or an API that uses both of services. Instead of each of us working on our end and maybe being disconnected based on like what's being created, the documentation, etc., we now have like this single space where both of our teams can be present, and we can start collaborating on this. Because there's a question right now that I just saw from Shabir. Do partners have to have licensed version of Postman? Yes. If you for the partner API network, you will need to be, I think, on the enterprise version, but at least on one of the paid version. But also, I do want to remind you to use the Q&A to ask your questions and not the chat, because that's where my colleagues can answer your questions. Okay. So partner workspaces. Now, let us do one thing. We generate a collection from one of our definition here. So I will go ahead and say generate a collection from the API definition. That's going to be my pet store test collection. There's a few settings you have here if you wanna generate your collection. I'm gonna leave it all to default. So this is mostly about how to organize your collection. Do you want to use tags for folders? Do you want to use different things? So now I have this collection, and I want to talk about the Postman CLI, which is pretty new and pretty cool. So when I showed you the runs before, I told you how you can run manually, and there's nothing new here. But the runs via CLI, the main difference here is now we provide you directly with the code you can use. So the Postman CLI is an executable. You would need to download that on your PC to be able to run it. So I've already downloaded it, so we can start playing with it. I'm going to bring my terminal. Oop, clear it before and zoom in a bit. Okay. So what do we have here? Whenever I want to start running a collection, I have different options. So here you can see by default, it's 2 lines of command, Postman login with API key. And that's one of the main difference with the Postman CLI and Newman, which is the Postman CLI actually is in a logged in state. What that means, it means you log in at the start of your session, and then you're able to access all of the file and all of the data that you have in your Postman account, usually, and you can navigate through that. Whereas with the Postman CLI, with Newman, you would either have to download stuff or use the Postman API key to query every single time you want something from your account. One of the cool features that we've also added is that now you have these little buttons called Add API Key, which means directly from this UI, I can generate an API key, give it a name, v10, and then insert it directly in the code. So now, let's see if this copies the whole thing. Nope. I can go to my terminal, paste this. It's going to log in and get the collection and start running it. So you can see it runs it. It executed 3 requests. And I think it failed probably because of the 404. 404, 404, 404. So that's cool. I see some wow in the chat. That's pretty cool. But that's not all. There's different benefits to it. So if you're familiar with the collection runner, you may know that you're able to untick, move stuff for your execution. So let's say I want to move this one first. You may have noticed that as I'm doing that, the code on the right actually changes as well. So let's say I want to make this one here. I don't want to run this one anymore. These comments that we give you are dynamic based on how you define your run here. So you can work in Postman, you can define what you want to run and when. And then once you're ready, you can copy the command and just run in your terminal. So now I only have one. So I should be able to do Postman collection run, put in my terminal and run it. And yeah, it only ran once, which is what I was expecting. 4 found, which was also what I was expecting, but you can see it creates a dynamic comment based on your selection. One of the information here is also that the data is available in your workspace. Let's have a look. So that's another of the quality of the Postman CLI compared to Newman. In Newman, you can set a flag for your data to be sent to Postman, so you can see it in the UI. But in here, by default, your test results are coming to Postman. So this is the last run. This is the one we just did. You can see that it only ran a single request. But I can go back to view all runs. And here, I should be able to see this run. Oh, actually, I think the other one didn't send to Postman. So let's run this one again. We run it a couple of times, so we have some data in Postman. Oop. One more time. Okay. And now you can see directly they're showing up here. I could jump in and see the reports. If I don't like this view, I can see the summary. So again, here I only have a single request that is being sent, so it might not make sense to switch between these two views. But if you're in a case where you have tons of requests, this view would give you a split between each run, when they failed, what tests failed, etc. So yeah, that's the Postman CLI kind of in a nutshell. I'm not diving deep into it, and that's only from the consumer view. So I was in the collection run. Everything that I've done here, you're also able to do it from the API definition. So if I jump back to my API and I go in tested automation, from here, let's say I want to generate a CI configuration for Travis CI. But I can say, I'm using Travis CI. I want to run that pet store test collection, not the Swagger pet store. And then if I had an environment, I could select it. And this is going to generate directly the Postman CLI command as well for that specific tool, CI/CD provider. So that's the list we have for now. So Bitbucket, Circle CI, GitLab, Jenkins, Azure, GitHub, and Travis CI. This is not a finite list. We add some as we go. But in my humble opinion, I think that's a good start. Yeah. So if you want to do anything with the Postman CLI, don't start and try to figure out how you need to write your commands. Go directly in the tool, select what you're using, select your operating system, and then come in here to copy and paste. The same way, you can see here, it's using a variable for the Postman API key. I can go from here and I can say v10, and it's going to generate a new one for me to use and to add to my variables on whichever tool I'm using. Cool. That was a lot of talking. Was quite a few things as well. So I'm going to take it back from the start, kind of walk through everything we've done, just to remind you of the different features that we showcased, and then I'll jump into the Q&A to see what you've all been asking during the demo. So going back from the top, we were on the homepage and we talked about creating a new workspace. So we created a new workspace called v10 unboxing. From there, we dragged and dropped an image, which is the new way that you can do add images to your documentation. So no need to upload it somewhere, get the link, add it with with code. You can just drag and drop an image and it's going to be uploaded directly. Then we imported a multi-file API. So you can see here, I have a definition that has a root file, but also is linked and referencing to other things. So anyone that's working with big API definition would be pretty happy with this. That said, you still see your documentation the same way here. So I can just jump directly to a specific parameter, and this is going to link me to the right place. The other thing we saw is that directly in this view, I have this new tab called rule. The rule is either API governance rule or API security rules. It's the two types we support that are Postman provides some, but then your team is able to create some custom zones as well. And there's a few things here. You can directly go and look for a possible fix, or you can hide if it's not relevant to you. We also looked at where you can define these. So if I go to my team settings, I can see the different pools here. If I were an admin, I could turn them on and off. I could delete those that I'm not interested in, etc. So that's the API governance and API security part of things. We also connected our repository to GitHub. We support other providers like GitLab and Bitbucket, etc. But we did link that one to GitHub, and you can see from here, from the homepage, I have the remote connected repository, and I could click on it and go directly and see it there. So what it created when I created a Postman folder with collections and schemas. Main benefit of that being not all of your team is probably working in Postman. Maybe your developers are working directly on GitLab or GitHub. So you're just making these things accessible to them, and you can decide what source of truth you want to have. So let's say maybe you have some GitHub actions that are running on your collections, etc. Then all of it lives at the same place, and you have full version control, obviously, provided by Git. What else did we see? We talked about gRPC, which is not as much used in Postman so far as REST, but you can still do that. So you can import a proto file, which is what we did. We didn't do much. The main benefit of that, and the main new feature here, is that as soon as you have a proto file, you're able to create a new API request and generate a mock server from it. So I did not actually save my API request, but if I create quickly a new one, I can say, oh, use my hello service proto file, create a mock server, and then I can start sending requests to that mock server. So I don't need to create anything. All I have to do is using that mock server. I can start sending things. I can generate, send, and see what's happening. I can also write tests now, so I can test my gRPC request the same way I could test my REST APIs until now in Postman, REST or GraphQL. And then we talked about the different type of workspaces. So when you are in Postman, one of the things that we don't want you to do is reinvent the wheel. You want to use some of your team's API. Chances are they've made it available in the private API network. You want to use maybe a Dolby API. You want to use Google API. Chances are it's in the public API network. And then if you're working with a specific partner, and that's the main new thing here, the partner API network allows you to create a workspace, which is going to be just for you and for a specific partner where you can collaborate on specific elements, collections, documentation, API, etc. Lastly, we looked at the Postman CLI. The Postman CLI is a new way to run collections and tests outside of Postman. And we saw that, go back to the one we used, which was that one. We saw that you could run, using the Postman CLI, your collections in your terminal or in a CI/CD for that matter, and get the results back in Postman directly. We also generate the code directly for you. So if you go ahead and try to do a run, you can automate the runs, and it's going to give you the right code based on how you define what you want to do with your tests. We also saw that you can generate the code for the CI/CD pipelines, and I think that's about it. That covers most of the features. This is not all. This is most of the features I could fit in that webinar. We have 10 minutes, so I'm going to go for the Q&A. There's one more article that I'm going to show you now, though, and also share on the chat. If you go to blog.postman.com, there's this main one, announcing Postman v10. This one will be more exhaustive and will contain more about like the benefits of v10, the thinking behind it, and how you can leverage it. Okay, so let's go back to the slides and jump into, I think Ian spoiled it already, but how do you get access to v10? If you want to get access, if you want to try any of these new features, as I mentioned at the start, we're rolling v10 on the slow rollout. So anyone who signs up for early access will get early access compared to others. So the link is in the chat. Go there. I think it's just sign up with your Postman email, and then you'll get Postman as soon as we release it to more people in the early access list. I don't actually have the number, but we have quite a few people already on that list. I think we already had someone in that webinar that is already on v10. So yeah, that's the best way to get access to v10. What's next? There's a few things on the roadmap. Obviously, v10 we're not going to just stop to v10. We're going to add more stuff. So server-side code generation, we have some, and we'll add more. Git integration with your local files as well, and some more. So we have a public roadmap. If you want to know more about this, you can go there and keep track of what's coming up. Okay, a few additional resources. Postman Space Camp, that's where you are today. So if you didn't know about Space Camp, it's a 1 hour long learning session where we talk about different features, either like overall what's new, or we dive deeper into several. So for example, like I think next month we'll have Introduction for Testers session. So if you're into testing and you want to know more about how it works with Postman, join that session. 30 Days of Postman for Developers, which is a 30-day long challenge, as you would have guessed. In Postman, the community forum for any of your questions, and Postman Answers, which is a workspace where we actually share some common workflows in Postman. So you can go ahead, let's say you want to loop through a file, maybe you want to pass a variable from one request to another. You don't have to figure out how that works. You can go to that workspace and fork the collection that shows you how to do it. Okay, now it's my time to review. While I go through the Q&A, there's this link at the bottom. That's the link to the survey that I mentioned at the start. Please let us know what you think about this webinar and what we can do better for the next one. And yeah, I think that's about it. So let me go ahead and see what my colleagues put together for me in terms of questions. So first question from Jeffrey. Which features are available in the Postman without being logged in? My company disables being able to log into Postman. First things first, we need to talk to your company so they give you access. I think that's the main thing. But if you can't log into Postman, there's two options. So is it, I'm not sure if it's logging in or running Postman. If it's running Postman, you can use the web version. So everything that I've done today was actually using Postman on the web, for which you don't need to install anything. But if you can't log in, you can use the Scratchpad, where you'll be able to access all of the collection features without having to log in. So if you're going to the Learning Center, which is learning.postman.com, and searching for Scratchpad, you'll find all of the information that you need regarding that. Question from Anonymous. Let's see. In my enterprise, a lot of people use and like Postmans, but don't know that we have a team license. Is there a way to identify who has an account on our email domain to have them join the team? Yes, it's called Team Discovery. It's something you can enable in your team settings. Same again, please go to the Learning Center and search for Team Discovery. I don't know if maybe Ian can send these links as we go. Ian or Kevin, if you can jump to the Learning Center and drop this in the chat, or maybe you've already answered these questions actually. Do Postman CLI call count against your Postman API usage? Same goes for the connection to the CI tool like Azure Pipeline. Can we see an example for that code structure works? That's a good question. I'm actually not sure. I don't think there's a limit to the number of API calls. We have a limit of API calls per minute. So there's like a threshold you can't go ahead, but there's not a limit of API calls you do per month, etc. We do have limits of number of like mock calls, but I would need to come back to you on that one. So Mark, if you wanna reach out by email or Twitter, etc., or you can ask on the community forum and we can give you a better answer. Question from Raphael. Did you implement automatic changing of dark mode, light mode depending on the OS? It would be amazing. Yes, it would be amazing. We've not yet. This is something we're working on for now. One of the things that we've added, and I can actually showcase that one. Let me see if I have Postman running somewhere. So if you're using Postman, one of the latest version, one of the things that we did recently was actually integrating the header to the UI. So it used to be two different lines where you had like the minimize, maximize, and close button, and then the Postman header. So we first worked on that, which was also another feature we had for a while. And the next one will be adapting to the theme that is set at the OS level. As you could have probably guessed, the team have been pretty busy with v10, but this is stuff that we have in our feature request pipeline, and we hope to fix. Another question from Shudza. I might be pronouncing names wrong. Apologies. Security testing in API tab test against only SQL injections. Are they going to be added other than SQL injection? Which one? I don't think the security testing in API tab test only against that. If you look at the API security here, there's tons of rules. There's injection, but there's like broken user authentication, data exposure. So there's tons of stuff, and you're able to create your custom rules. So that should be, yeah, you're not limited to SQL injections for sure. Okay, I think that's all the questions that I had in the chat here. All of the other ones, I know there was more. Actually, see, there was 40 questions throughout the webinar, but I think most of them were answered by my colleagues, which I'm very thankful for. Where to get the definition file? So the demo that I've given with the pet store file, I actually found that somewhere on GitHub. But you could actually, now that I have it on my account, you can go to this link. I'll post that in the chat, and you can get it from there as well. So you can fork that repository or download that repository, and you'll have access to the same file. Let's see if there's any other. I think that's it. Cool. Let me go back here. Reminder, please fill in the survey. If you don't, anyway, we'll be sending you an email in the next couple of days with like the recording, the link to the survey, the link to the different blogs that we've talked about, and different features that we've talked about. But with that said, this is the end of this webinar. Hopefully you've learned some stuff. Hopefully you'll get to get access to v10 very soon once you register to the early access list. A couple of things to look forward to. We have live stream tomorrow to talk specifically about the API network. We have the next Basecamp is going to be in about a month, and it's going to be for API integrations for testers. So you can keep an eye out for this one as well. And just in general, have a look out for our blog, blog.postman.com, which is tons of information about like what's coming out, how to use the feature, and comparison. Like for example, Ian published a blog recently about comparing HTTP and gRPC. So tons of stuff there. Oh yeah, and live stream on October 13th, specific to gRPC and how to do that in Postman. So if you're looking to dive deeper into that, our live streams are on our YouTube channel, so you can keep an eye out for that as well. All right. Thanks you all for joining. We'll see you at one of the many future events that we have, hopefully. Enjoy Postman v10, and see you next time. Bye-bye.